Or less. We are live now. Hey, everyone. Happy Thursday night. Happy Thursday night live. We are back for another week on YouTube and Facebook, Thursday Night Live. Dan Torgman here. Penelope Miller, the birthday girl. Hello, Penelope.
Hello.
Yesterday wasn't enough. I'm going to have more people send you more birthday wishes and just keep it going. It's a birthday week.
Thank you. Yeah, 22. Who knew? So exciting.
Yeah, 1 year older, but you got a long way to go till you hit that 30 mark. Dr. Sara Langsam with us. Hello, doctor. How are you?
Hello. I'm good. How are you?
Good. And down below we got Andrew Van Epps, another doctor from University of Pennsylvania, New Bolton Center, and then we also have Jamie Hayden, a member of the family here, the Jockey Club family. Hello, Jamie.
How you guys doing? Thanks for having us.
All right. Well, it's great to have everyone here. Tonight's going to be a big learning experience. Past couple of weeks, we've done a lot of racing-focused stuff. We've done some aftercare. But let's face it, Penelope and I are not doctors. We do not know much about equine science, although Penelope has spent a good amount of time around horses. We have a lot to learn, especially when it comes to laminitis. And that's going to be the main focus of our conversation tonight. So, let me jump into just a couple of introductions. I've done the name introduction. I just want to give you a little background on everyone you're seeing on the screen right now. Dr. Sara Langsam here, who, as I mentioned a moment ago, is joining us tonight, is she's a fellow New Yorker, which is awesome, for starters. She's also a graduate of UPenn's vet school. She did a hospital internship at Rood and Riddle in Lexington before joining TFB Equine and then becoming a partner there. She's worked at just about every racetrack that I can think of, every big racetrack on the East Coast, Gulfstream, Delaware. She's worked at Fair Hill, at Keeneland, and she's now basically stationed at Belmont Park. And she serves their clients year-round there at Belmont Park. She's still going to Belmont Park. We just discussed a few moments ago, every single day, in spite of all the craziness with coronavirus, and working there. And she also currently serves on the AAEP's Racing Committee and Grayson Scientific Committee. And Grayson will link it all together. That's what Jamie is the president of. So, Sara, welcome. Did I miss anything in that intro?
No, probably too much. No, everything was pretty factual. There you go.
Good. Just want to give a little background before we start jumping into things. Dr. Andrew Van Epps, drinking what looks like a Yingling, I believe, tonight. Is that right?
Derry, Pennsylvania.
Yingling.
There you go. He heads the research lab there at the University of
America's oldest brewery.
Beautiful, beautiful. How far are you from there, by the way? Have you been there?
Not very far, probably 40 minutes. 40 minutes drive.
Nice. So Dr. Van Epps, he heads a research laboratory at the University of Pennsylvania's New Bolton Center, as we mentioned moments ago, focused on improving the understanding, prevention, and treatment of equine laminitis. You may have picked up on the accent. He's originally from Australia. He spent 5 years working at the racetrack after graduation from where he graduated from school in Australia. And then he came here.
You sound so confused by that, Dan.
Well, no, because he's got, it's an interesting story. He actually spent a good amount of time at UPenn back in the early 2000s, actually around the time, we'll circle back to Barbaro, around that time. And then he went back to the University of Queensland in Australia, and then just came back a few years ago here to the New Bolton Center in 2017 as an associate and associate professor. And the focus of his work and his research for all these years has been laminitis. Andrew, did I get that right mostly?
You did. I am a track vet masquerading as a researcher, basically.
Good deal.
Good stuff. And then Jamie Hayden. Jamie didn't send me an extensive bio, so I just put together what I could cobble together online and pretty much what I know of him. So he's the president of the Grayson-Jockey Club Research Foundation. And Grayson, for those of you who don't know, funds a range of veterinary research at universities throughout North America and beyond. And again, the focus here is all the same. It's committed to the advancement of horses of all breeds. And when it comes to laminitis, Grayson has really been at the forefront of a lot of the research that's been done especially over the past 10 or 15 years when we've seen a lot of progress that we're going to get into here in a little while. Jamie, I didn't mention too much more about you, though. What should people know about you, what you did before Grayson?
Well, I'd like to say the first thing is I've gambled on all those racetracks that Sarah's worked at. So I feel like I have also contributed in some way to that health of the industry.
Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely.
It's a crucial
Yeah.
move. Yeah.
Yeah. And then more importantly, I have the privilege to be co-workers with these two great hosts that do the show every Thursday.
Yeah.
All right. So Dan, like most of us in the industry, we're not hired, we're bred. And so my father worked for the Jockey Club for 37 years. And my first job, actually, where Uncle Sam got to take taxes out, was the maintenance crew at Keeneland. Weed eating, scraping fences, mucking stalls for the old July sale, setting up the tents, doing everything I could to keep out of trouble for a couple of summers. And then from there, you know, I've done different jobs, from working at the KTA, typing registrations on index cards when I was still in high school, to working with the Breeders' Cup, fortunately, for 3 years when I was in college, interning and getting to know all their different departments. And then from there, when I got out of college, I worked for the NTRA for 5 years, running the National Handicapping Championship, the first 5 of those, with Keith Chamblin and the staff, and Peter Rotundo and Justin McDonald and the guys over at Breeders' Cup were there. And then I worked at 4 Star Sales, selling horses with Kerry Cawthon and the Great Houses and Dan Kenny and Johnny T.L. Jones when he was still alive. And then from there, I went to the state of Kentucky and I ran incentive and development funds for them. And then I came to the Jockey Club after 2008 when they formed the safety committee after the 8 Bells incident. And have worked with Grayson on the Welfare and Safety Summit since then, but became president of Grayson in 2019 when Ed Bowen retired, and got the opportunity to work with great veterinarians and researchers like Andrew and Sara. So what you said about Grayson is right. Research, it doesn't go up and say, are you an Arabian? I can attack you. That's not the way laminitis works, as Andrew will tell you. As a matter of fact, maybe here in a minute, a warm blood will walk by the window, and she actually has laminitis as well.
Oh.
And she's my wife's backyard horse, who's 26 this year. So
Wow.
it's something that affects us and that's personal for us. And that's why it's so easy to do.
Nice. Well, I want to say, and I know, Jamie, you said you really want a lot of the attention to be on both the doctors we have on tonight, but I wanted to give you an opportunity, just because I think it's a good sort of launching off point for this conversation, to kind of talk about just briefly really how Grayson kind of emerged as a big player, especially after Barbaro, because that's how, when anybody who knows anything about laminitis automatically thinks Barbaro. They remember when Barbaro got hurt and then, several months later developed laminitis. And we'll get into why that was, because there are reasons why laminitis develops. And then we'll talk about kind of where we've come since then. Just kind of talk about a little bit in terms of, what Barbaro did in terms of creating awareness about laminitis, and how Grayson has really, evolved since then, and has really kind of taken the lead in research on this front.
Yeah. So when Barbaro went to the hospital and then developed laminitis, they started the Barbaro Fund. And there was a lot of donations generated. And the goal for that was to raise awareness and funds for laminitis. And so when they did that, we were able to direct distinct funds. And some of those funds, actually, I believe Andrew was a beneficiary of when he was down at Queensland. And they were able to direct, since 1999, we've had 28 laminitis projects at 15 universities for just over $2 million. And that's just for laminitis funding. And a lot of that money and a lot of that funding has come in the recent years, since 2008, in the last decade, since Barbaro. So every year we'll just real quick and back up, and Sara and Andrew both participate in this outstanding research advisory committee that we have for Grayson. And every year we'll get about 50 to 70 grants submitted that range all over the place, from tendon treatments to stem cells to the genome to colic to infectious disease, you name it, and that committee will review it. And so laminitis projects, obviously during those times after Barbaro, we're seeing more of them. So a lot more got submitted, and they'll tell you a lot of cool stuff that came out of that research, mainly being cryotherapy, which was a very beneficial tool in treating laminitis. And I believe has allowed a lot of horses to return not only successfully to the races, but also the breeding shed.
Jamie, am I making this up in my head? But the second you said cryotherapy, and I'm sure we're going to jump on this later, so I'm breaking out of the gate. But was that what helped Lady Eli?
Yeah, so I believe Sara was actually part of the team that treated Lady
spoiler,
Eli when
sorry.
Yeah, no. Andrew, I believe, was part of the team down at Queensland. Is that right, Andrew? That performed some of the research and led to the cryotherapy breakthrough. And Sara was part of the team.
It actually was.
Oh no!
Oh, I'm sorry. It was actually it was part of when I was many years ago, and then there was some Grayson-funded projects that I think were between about maybe 2007 and up until we actually just finished one. So there was probably about 10 years worth of projects focused on cooling. And I think if you were to ask most people what's been a bit of a game changer in terms of preventing or even treating acute laminitis, we've done some work on treating acute laminitis. It's probably that, and over again, it's shown that it can have some effect. And amongst other horses was Painter as well. Was a horse that was treated with cooling and I believe returned to the track right after that. So I think that is something that's definitely given us some sort of option, because we felt mostly helpless, I think, didn't we, Sara?
Yeah.
Prior to having
so
that
rather than treat. I think you need to avoid it.
So before we jump into all these really cool treatments and stuff like that, and sorry, Dan, I'm just going to take the reins because I'm on a roll right now. At a very, high level, very basically, can you explain to all of us what laminitis is? Like, we hear about it, we know Barbaro had it, Painter, Lady Eli, but what is it?
Andrew, or you want to take it? Want me to take it?
I can probably answer it. It's a common question that I answer. You can pull a string on my back and I'll answer it. The horse is unique because it is the only, or equids really are the only kind of species group that essentially walks right up on the tip of their fingernail. And so the bone inside the foot is actually suspended within the hoof, and the hoof is like our fingernail, so it's essentially like us walking around on a single fingernail. And the lamellae, or the lamina, there's a couple of different words, is the tissue that actually connects the bone to the hoof. And that tissue has to be very special because the forces that are acting are several times the body weight of the horse in the lead leg at the gallop. These are massive, massive forces. So that tissue is folded and folded again. And there's about a meter squared in 3 square feet of, actually it's 9 square feet. 9 square feet is a meter squared of tissue packed in to that tiny little space that has branches and branches like kind of leaves or little pine needles, I guess, that increase that surface area of attachment and interlock to make that a very strong attachment. And laminitis is essentially failure of that attachment that can occur for various different reasons and can occur in various different gradients of severity, from mild, which might cause no lameness, no outward issues, but perhaps could be performance limiting, right up to very severe, which could mean that when there's wholesale failure of that tissue, the bone actually sinks through the hoof, and now is kind of bearing on the ground surface, and that for horses is life-threatening and crippling for sure. So I was reading something today. I think it was on Fran Yerger's hoof blog, and she was likening it to when you detach a fingernail, how painful that is. Well, imagine if you then had to, you were forced to walk around on the tip of that fingernail. And you had no other option.
Is it something that's sort of immediately visible, or is it more reacting to the horse's clear pain that they're in?
The pain.
Well,
yeah. I mean, I think pain is your first sign on my end.
Yeah, but the interesting thing about the pain is that they can have pretty significant damage even before the pain becomes evident. And, with different forms of this disease, you mentioned that horses like Barbaro, horses like Country House, these are horses that have been putting too much load on one leg, and they've got it in the opposite leg generally. And that's one way you can get it. The other ways you can get it are if a horse that is systemically ill, sick, like Painter, for instance, had a colitis, like a sepsis. And the other way you can get it is basically if you have insulin dysregulation. So like pre-diabetic people, metabolic syndrome type people, horses have the same problems often with being overweight, not necessarily overweight sometimes, just a propensity to make too much insulin in response to sugars that they're ingesting in pasture or in hard feed. And those horses are by far the most common reason for laminitis that we see, and in the thoroughbred world often include broodmares in that group, but not only broodmares, but well-conditioned young horses as well. And that particular type of laminitis can really creep up on a horse, and you can start to get damage in there that is evident even on x-ray, but not necessarily causing lameness in the horse at the time. So there's a whole spectrum of presentations and severities and outcomes for horses that have laminitis for sure.
That's it. This is fascinating to me because I've worked with horses literally my entire life. Like, I grew up on a farm. We've had horses with laminitis, as you said, from every age. And I never knew that there were 9 square feet of tissues just hanging out in the hoof. I'm going to be careful with that hoof pick from here on out. But one of the things I do want to ask as well is we've talked about some really famous thoroughbreds who have had laminitis. This isn't a disease, though, that only affects thoroughbreds. Is that right? It's miniature horses to Clydesdales.
It's universal.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's part of what Grayson does, right, Jamie? Like, it's a thoroughbred initiative that's designed to help horses in general.
Yeah, like we were saying, research knows no breed or discipline. And Andrew was talking about the insulin regulation of and the way you get it. And that's how a lot of non-thoroughbreds that are hanging out in pastures, like my wife's warm blood, has it, because we let her get a little bit too much weight, and you have spring grasses coming on, and the body's doing different things. But also when any horse undergoes a surgery or has about a colic or something like that, Andrew was talking about supporting limb laminitis, and any horse can get that. And ponies will also get little ponies, and that's why you'll see a lot of them muzzled, is to keep the weight off.
Right.
Yeah. I think that supporting limb laminitis is probably the easiest one to visualize, just because you can envision a horse like Barbaro, right, who has, a foot that one side he cannot support any weight on, and so it's all on the other side, and in turn that they're just like human beings, right? I mean, if we have an injury and we're putting too much weight on one side or another, we're going to have other complications that stem from that. Sara, what would you tell us in terms of, once you start working with a horse who's been diagnosed with laminitis, we talked about some of the indications. What about treatments? I mean, where do you go from there?
Yeah, I mean, on our end, I'm pretty happy to say that we don't really see it very often at the racetrack. Probably because people are pretty good at managing predisposing conditions that would lead to laminitis. So they know what to look for, and we can catch them pretty early. Whether it's a diarrhea where, we're constantly monitoring their pulses in their feet and their heat in their feet to make sure, even if we preemptively pack their feet with mud, anything we can do to keep inflammation out of their feet. But then when we do see them, it becomes an emergency, very critical emergency. And we were talking about cryotherapy. That's probably one of the biggest things in the really acute phase, in the early first 2 days, 3 days, and we don't really have any fancy equipment to do it, but it's pretty as simple as just putting them in ice tubs constantly. And then heavy anti-inflammatories. Obviously, we're still treating whatever the problem that caused it, whether it was, diarrhea or anything that sometimes even just, radical changes in angles of shoes will cause a laminitic event. I've had that before. Mm-hmm. There's, varying degrees. So for us, it's a lot of anti-inflammatories, a lot of ice, immediate attention to the feet as far as we have different foot packings and different foams that we can get there. And then also, another big thing for us was using veterinary podiatrists to, the most immediate thing you want to do is wedge up the back of their heel so you can take off pressure on the front of that toe, which the lamina are all inflamed, and there's supporting structures in the back of the leg that are pulling it. It's just part of their normal apparatus in their leg. So if we can take off some of the ability of those tendons to pull on the front of the toe, which would pull across and lead to more rotation, which would be a more long-term problem, then that's what we do. So there's some special shoes that don't even need to be glued on, or can be glued on eventually, but in the acute phase can just be taped on, that wedge up the back of their heel. So we can, and it can radically make them more comfortable sooner, which is the key.
We have a really good question from Michael Eason, circling back to the question about, or what you were talking about with the insulin. And he asks, how do vets measure a thoroughbred sugar intake? Like, how do you know when it's an insulin problem?
I'm definitely panning that to Andrew, because we don't on a regular basis. We're not doing that in our situation.
It's not necessarily the sugar intake. It's the individual propensity to how they actually react to the sugar. So, one of the reasons we don't see a lot of laminitis of that kind in thoroughbred horses is their age. Generally between 2 and 5, 6 years old is generally what we have on the track of things until they get a little bit older. But in other horses where we suspected that this could be a problem, what we actually do is what's called an oral sugar test. So we give them a known amount of oral sugar, and then we measure in their blood how much insulin they produce 60 or 90 minutes afterwards. And your normal response might be sort of 25, 30 international units of insulin. And some of these animals that have this problem with insulin regulation might be 500, 600 plus. It's incredible. And one of the things that we've learned in the last sort of 10 years, really, only, we had no idea about this when Barbaro was around. We had very little idea. In fact, I remember I was a resident when Barbaro was in hospital, and we measured. I suggested this was just coming to light, and I sort of suggested that we should measure his insulin just for interest, and it was normal actually.
Wow!
But in the last 10 years, we've actually realized that insulin in large amounts in the blood for long periods of time directly damages the feet in these horses that have problems with insulin regulation.
Well, I imagine that at least for the first half of that insulin test, those must be the happiest patients you ever have.
Yes.
Of the three, we talked about sort of the three likely, causes of laminitis with racehorses. Is it? I know you said it's not typically the insulin related one. I mean, is it really just from the like the Barbaro situation, putting weight on one side over another? Is that the most common?
I would say in horses that have had surgery, yes, orthopedic surgery, I would say that's probably the most common cause. But for us that have them at the racetrack, it could be anything. I would say, any kind of septic situation where diarrhea or a bad pneumonia, those things are probably more likely to cause the laminitis than, I mean, unless we have a really lame horse.
Yeah. And I wonder, so obviously we've talked about, Barbaro, Lady Eli, Painter. I was just kind of like went down a rabbit hole today and I was looking up some older stuff too. And I didn't realize, or maybe I knew it at some point, but I didn't realize Secretariat actually died of laminitis. And so like those are the big ones. We know them. Are there a lot more racehorses who get laminitis, but we don't know them because they're not as popular, or is the actual is the rate smaller than we think? And then I'm also curious about sort of the recovery rate. So of the ones that we know, I mean, we mentioned Painter and Lady Eli. They survived and made it back to the races. How likely is it for a horse to come back from it? So that's a two-part question. How common is it, and how likely is it to sort of come back from? Andrew, you want this one? Or
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult question because in the general population, I know Sarah would say she probably doesn't see a lot of overt clinical laminitis on a day-to-day basis in racetrack horses, and the impact that it has on racing horses. The biggest impact is probably that when there is a serious problem like a fracture or a serious painful infection, it really limits our ability to successfully treat really severe problems. And, when horses fracture things, they tend to do a pretty good job of it. It's just their nature. And, unfortunately, most of those horses, we put them down. And the reason we put them down is not because we can't fix the bones. We can fix the bones. The technology is there. These horses, guys like Dean Richardson at UPenn that put Barbaro's leg back together are unbelievable. The skills there, the equipment's there. They recover them in pools, all sorts of amazing. They monorail them in and out of the pool for recovery. It's not a problem with fixing it, but we know that these horses have a really high probability of developing laminitis and then getting put down, and that is the biggest reason for us euthanizing these animals. And so, from the supporting limb standpoint, I think that is a massive impact. And then, one thing that's occurring to me with some of the research that we're doing, and particularly some of the research we've done out of the last Grayson project that focused on supporting limb laminitis, we're starting to realize that there are mild repercussions that don't necessarily cause overt laminitis in some of these horses that aren't moving around normally, that aren't bearing weight normally, because they have painful limb conditions. And I'm really starting to wonder what impact that has on horses that have lesser fractures, lesser problems, but still undergo periods where they're confined, not walking, not ambulating normally. Because what we're really starting to get a handle on is the need of the horse to actually move around for that tissue to remain healthy. And it's I always feel like we're reinventing things that people knew many years ago. The cooling is one example of that, but another example is actually this effect of not moving around normally, and in fact, in some really old textbooks from the British Navy, where they used to ship horses long distances at sea, months on ships. What they noticed is that if they disembarked after a journey that was more than it's like more than 3 weeks or something like that in duration, that if they worked those horses within 2 weeks of disembarking, they foundered with almost every time. And so what their rule was is that they had to give them 2 weeks of complete just rest in paddocks before they started to do any work with them, unless they were able to walk them around deck during their journey. And it's super interesting, because I think we're actually starting to.
Yeah,
I think we're starting to realize
coax a horse around a ship and not in the middle of the Atlantic. Fine, it's fine. Don't spook at it.
Lots of snorting.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
And then I guess the other impact in the thoroughbred world, sorry, Penelope, but the other impact in the thoroughbred world probably lies in the broodmare sphere. You know, I think if you were to take X-rays of 100 broodmares, and I've asked this question actually, people that deal with a lot of broodmares, you know, how many would have evidence of laminitis, and you know, it's more than 50%, and some people who deal with a lot of them say probably 80%.
Wow.
So,
I think that's why you're not hearing about
very common.
Yeah, because it happens after they leave.
And they're not necessarily that lame, but they can be, and it's often, you know, it is the end of them as they get older, in particular, and develop more issues with sort of endocrine disease, with insulin regulation. But you know, the broodmare side of it is definitely the other big impact in the racing sphere.
Yeah.
One of the things I do want to touch on, though, because I'm really glad you brought up the mobility and, you know, that sort of thing. I think a lot of people don't realize that, you know, unlike a human who can just, you know, recover in bed for X amount of time if they get a bad injury, can you explain why you can't just have a horse lay in a stall, you know, just keep them lying down or something like that? Why it's not really physically possible?
It's not. I mean, it's not only because of their mere size, really. Like, they have to, and just how they're made. Their body systems require standing, whether it's their GI tract. If they lie down for too long, their muscles can get impacted. So anytime that for other reasons we're dealing with a horse that's down, whether there's other conditions that make them paralyzed for temporary periods, there's lots of flipping them over because blood's pooling in muscles, and they just are not made to lie still. We've tried certain things in slings for certain injuries, but there's a lot of horses that won't tolerate a sling situation, and it doesn't work. If we could get them to lie down, we could repair so many, just like Andrew was talking about, we would be able to repair so many more things. But unfortunately, the curse of the horse is that as soon as anything's repaired, they pretty much have to be up on their feet. And to avoid problems like laminitis, they have to be walking pretty well.
Right.
Even if it's only in a stall, they have to be standing pretty equally to avoid complications like laminitis. So it definitely adds. It's a big problem for repairing things and maintaining horses.
Right. But thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. Andrew just touched on kind of looking, you know, looking at history or looking back or reading books at potential, you know, for potential insights as to how, you know, this actual particular disease might work and potentially, you know, how we might treat it. But I'm wondering about the future and kind of the, you know, with the efforts that Grayson makes and that we're all doing. Obviously, as we mentioned, you know, we're all hoping that there's some sort of treatment long term that we can we can treat this more effectively. I just wonder, what does the future hold? I mean, as far from where you are right now, I mean, what does the future look like in terms of treatment? Andrew or Jamie, or you could double team that one if you'd like.
Well, Andrew will be submitting the grants, so I'll let him speak.
Well, we are. I mean, I can hardly sit still in my chair. I'm so excited at the moment about a couple of things with respect to supporting laminitis. So, what we've discovered through our last Grayson work is that blood perfusion to the feet of these horses that aren't moving around enough is not sufficient to sustain the health of that tissue. And so we've actually also tried a method of improving blood perfusion, blood flow to that tissue, using kind of a pumping boot, and that did not work for us. But just before, for the last probably year and a half, we've been going over these results. We've been looking at other options for the holy grail for us is to be able to improve the blood capillary perfusion in that tissue between the hoof and the bone in the foot that is taking load without having to unload it and put the load on the fractured leg. And just before the coronavirus outbreak, we had in 2 kind of experimental replicates some really super exciting results that showed that we potentially can do that with a method that may well be quite easily achievable. And the other thing that we're kind of excited about is that we just from this, in these experiments that we ran, and we had horses kind of like standing around, and we had them putting a little bit of extra load on one foot and then not the other one. And then we had another group of horses that were kind of just standing around, eating hay and being bored and getting brushed. And in those horses that were standing around in stocks, they suffered some changes within their feet that didn't cause any overt pain or anything like that, but that we think are an early clue to what the processes might be that are getting triggered that makes that tissue let go. And so we're really excited about some more investigations into that, how it also might apply to other forms of laminitis, and how those processes might be able to be blocked pharmaceutically. I think researchers are always excited about the future, but because if you're not, I think you probably have to give it up. But I do think we are on the cusp of understanding supporting laminitis and probably being able to prevent it. Dan, you spoke about, will there ever be a way to treat it? Probably not in our lifetime. A successful way to treat it once it has gotten quite bad, and these cases get bad quick. And the reason for that is you probably will never be able to, without transplant or without 3D printing tissue, be able to restore that really intricate connection of tissue ever again, particularly under the load of the horse constantly. So the key is going to be prevention and early detection and intervention, and that's where we're really putting our energy, and that's what it is, making a difference in other forms of laminitis, and I think we can make a difference in supporting laminitis as well.
Before we jump into anything else, I just want to let everyone know Dan's dad says hi.
Hi, Dan's dad.
Hi, Dan's dad.
He's the best. He watches everything.
He'll appreciate
Dad located.
He's in Brooklyn. I still haven't seen him in 2+ months. I mean, between Brooklyn and Queens, there's
my dad's in Brooklyn as well.
Yeah, I read in your bio that you were born. Where were you born in Brooklyn?
Sheepshead Bay.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice. What hospital?
Laminitis.
Me too. Two
Really?
Laminitis babies. Yes.
Amazing! You guys are practically twins.
I know. That's awesome. Very
That's
cool.
cool.
Yeah, and then we moved to Long Island when I was like 5 or 6.
Nice. Very nice.
Got drugged to every racetrack in the East Coast and the West Coast a little bit.
Oh, it's better. Well, with my dad on here, I could tell you, and he could confirm. You had it pretty good. I mean, because where I got dragged was the OTB.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, I have you both beat. I grew up in Ocala, and I got dragged to Ocala High Line.
Hey, I did too, because we had a farm in Ocala when I was a kid.
Oh, nice. Where?
Right, like 27.
Did you say Reddick?
No, we weren't that far out. We're kind of close to Ocala Equine.
Okay, I was on 329.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I got to highlight if we had to bet on a horse or we had to watch a horse run.
Exactly. And then also catch this highlight, which is like
which is
kind of really cool.
I don't know.
Like we didn't get it, but we were, it was seeing a live sport in Ocala, which was like,
yeah, I know.
Mind-blowing.
Although he's been silent, I'm pretty sure Jamie has us all beat for degenerate childhood gambling stories.
I don't know.
My OTV was Keeneland.
There you go.
Yeah, no, that's not the same thing as like an actual OTV or a highlight fronton.
You would think not, but the second floor in December used to be great. Now with account wagering, our OTB is the couch, so
right,
much nicer.
It would have made my childhood a lot easier if there was an easier way for my parents to have bet when I was a kid.
Yeah, and like
trying to find less book somewhere.
Yeah, so mine actually is my love for horses came in probably with gambling, and I can tell you it was in the April of '87. We had spring break here in Central Kentucky. My mother was a teacher, and it snowed on spring break in April, as Lexington can do. So my dad, to get me out of the house, we went to Keeneland to go bet some races. And I loved a horse that went off at 10-1 named She's a Sleeper, because mom wouldn't get out of bed to come to Keeneland. So I bet 2 across the board on She's a Sleeper, and it came back like 62.50 somewhere.
Wow. Oh, and you were hooked. It was done.
Yeah, I thought it was the richest, I thought I was richest kid ever, but and I'll say this now, and I was like, Dad, I'm so nervous about. He was like, take the $6 and just go up to that window and bet. I'm like, I'm 10 years old.
Doesn't feel right.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah. I go, I'm 10 years old, and he looks at me and goes, this is Kentucky. If you can get your hand to that window, they'll take that money.
Oh, that's even New York too. Shh, don't tell anybody.
No, I mean, not that I'm telling.
I made her place my first bet at 3.
I might have been like an 11, 12-year-old that was like, can I have a tripart wheel, please?
The guy, it was just a private teller, and I won't say who because I think he's dead anyway by now, but yeah, they would go to their mom and be like, that's not what your daughter's betting, and she'd be like, oh, I don't want to know. Okay. I got $20 at the beginning of the day. Whatever I made, I got to keep.
Yep. And I would be like, are you 18?
Andrew, are the betting regulations this stringent in Australia?
Well, Queensland, when I was growing up, I remember actually someone putting up what the biggest industries in Queensland were by gross income, and it was like, wheat, beef, and racing, and coal. So we had a racing minister who, his entire job was in state politics was managing racing, and I mean, sadly now racing has really declined in Queensland, but it's still there and it's still relatively strong, but not exactly like it used to be, for sure. But I remember going to the track. It's like here, going to the track and on a Saturday reading the newspaper, and there'd be heaps of people in the stands, and now there's not many people, particularly at the trots. I'm sucking for the trots. Yeah, and
in Australia.
Yeah, big in Australia, yeah, for sure. And I've owned a pacer. I've owned a couple of pacers, and I remember being in the stands and watching an Inter Dominion, which is a big racing race in Australia and New Zealand, and in a full stand, and you couldn't hear a thing because people were screaming, and now that stand is roped off because it's falling apart, and there's about 2 people at the track, but
and yet somehow cricket is thriving, and that sport is the most confusing thing I have ever had to watch in my entire life. I actually worked in Australia for a foaling season. And I flew over on the stallion flight, and when we landed, I was so ready to go to bed, and they were like, surprise, you're night watching stallions. The only thing on was something called the Ashes tournament.
Oh, cricket, yeah.
Horrifying stuff. Like,
you got to get into it.
No, you got to get into it. The scores were 812 to 14. You stop for lunch and tea. Like,
Penelope, the most frustrating thing about cricket, I had fortunate to work at Ascot Racecourse for a summer and had to do the same thing and watch cricket. And I got into it. I understood it. I watched like a 7-day match, and they stopped with a tie.
Yeah.
Like, how does it take?
How does it end that way?
And it can still be really exciting after like 5 days. That's cricket. But there's an Amazon Prime documentary on at the moment called The Test, and it follows the Australian team. And it's really worth watching. And for people, I've got some friends over here that have no idea, and one guy's been watching it, and he's got some of the same reactions, like, what the hell is this? But
it's sort of like the opposite of horse racing, though. Like, horse racing is great. It starts, it's really exciting, and then it's done. And cricket starts, and it just...
It's all about the grind. I mean, these guys are out there batting for like days on end.
Yeah, man, it makes it all look like a thrill a minute.
People are running in, throwing 100-mile-an-hour balls, hard balls at them for days on end, and these guys, can focus ball after ball.
It's like baseball, but even slower.
Yeah.
When we were kids, we would, someone would come around, we would put the blazer on for the toss, and we would have the toss, and then we would have test cricket in the front yard. We had a book of records, guys would bat for 2 days, we'd have a break, have an ice cream, that's like life. That's life in Australia. So
did parents just cook this up to keep kids outside? Is that like some genius thing that happened, and like American parents just didn't catch on?
It is kind of bizarre. I mean, when you think about it, but I don't know. It's one of those things. It's like baseball. People get right into the kind of nuances and the records and the stats, and it's very much like that. And baseball came from cricket. Baseball is just because you guys here in the US just didn't have the attention span, so you had to invent
100% true. Like, I'm not going to fight the truth.
No. All right, since we've entirely lost the plot here. Let me try to bring it back slightly. I just want to say, because we did have some developing news this week that came out, the Grayson-Jockey Club Research Foundation actually holds a pretty big and pretty important summit every year called the Welfare and Safety of the Racehorse Summit. Jamie, you guys announced that this year it's canceled as sort of an in-person event, but you're going to be doing essentially a bunch of these, except, probably with fewer jokes and people who are more experienced than we are, explaining various topics. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so actually back in 2006, Grayson-Jockey Club Research Foundation and the Jockey Club started the Welfare and Safety of the Racehorse Summit. It was just to examine a variety of different things, probably the impetus being the starts per starter of the horse has just plummeted since the 70s and continues to creep down a little bit, but they started to look into issues, and that morphed into more issues of general integrity, safety, and welfare issues. So since 2006, we've been conducting, and this was supposed to be the 9th one, and always with our gracious and supportive partners at Keeneland. We host an event, have a panel of experts come in on a variety of different subjects, give presentations, and a lot of different things have come out of that. So I'll give you one example. Back in 2006, Dick Mandela was speaking at the Welfare and Safety Summit, and he said something that never really set right with him was the claiming game. And one small aspect of it was that you took ownership of the horse when the gate sprung open. If the horse suffered a fatality and he got claimed, you were left with an empty halter. And Dick Mandela just didn't think that was right. So we started thinking about void claim rules. And now as you read about some of these things that we believe have led to lower fatalities, and Sarah can probably speak about that even, is when you have a void claim rule in there, maybe you're taking some risk and some propensity of that game, maybe to risk with the horse out of it. So that's just one example. But, other things like, obviously the equine injury database is the most important thing that's come out of the summit and allows us to track fatalities at almost all of the racetracks now in North America. The Racing Services Testing Lab was another huge invention that came out of that, where the industry didn't have a designated laboratory to send their soil samples to. And now we do have a designated laboratory with Dr. Mick Peterson. So there's just a few of the things. Toe grabs on front shoes with Dr. Stover's research about preventing the slide.
And this all come out of the summit?
Yeah, all this stuff has come out of the summit with doing different presentations or expanding on research that has been out there and just didn't get the sunlight that it deserved, right? So one of the things that we always like to continue to do is try to put these on. This was supposed to be the 9th one. We were looking forward to it. And obviously with what happened last year at Santa Anita, there was a lot of interest with fatalities of the racehorse. So we're still going to put that on, but we're going to do it like you guys do and do a webinar series. We're going to start next Tuesday at 2:00. And you can find all the links at the Jockey Club's websites. We'll have them all out next week. But we're going to start with Dr. Katie Garrett from Rood and Riddle, and she's going to talk about fetlock injuries. And as the doctors can tell you, and Sarah can tell you, the majority of our fatal injuries that occur during racing occur out of the fetlock and the suspensory apparatus down there. So we're going to start with her and continue every Tuesday. And we've got 6 of them scheduled. And if they get good reception and people still want to hear and cover topics, we'll reach out to some experts and cover those.
Does it cost anything to watch them? Can anybody hop on?
Absolutely free. Anybody can hop on. We'll have live Q&A just like you guys. So if you hear something, you want to ask a question, you've had a horse, you just are interested in the subject, and a lot of them will just be driven like that. So it'll be fetlock injuries, a veterinarian panel with Dr. Dion Benson from the Stronach Group, Will Farmer, the medical director for Churchill Downs Incorporated Tracks, Scott Palmer, the equine medical director in New York, and Dr. Ryan Carpenter, who's a practicing veterinarian out in California, are going to talk about the importance of monitoring horses between starts, this new phase that we believe we're getting ready to get into. And you hear a lot about rules of transparency of medical records, transferring medical records with horses for that. They're going to talk about that. The third week, we'll come back with Dr. Mick Peterson, and he's going to talk about track surfaces, how we get international standards, how standards are created for surfaces, and the new maintenance quality system that they've got when he moved to the University of Kentucky. And then the next week, we'll come back and we're going to do a conversation with Dr. Jennifer Durenberger, who's the Jockey Club steward in New York and is also a veterinarian and an attorney. She's great. She's a very accomplished lady, and we really like her. And she's going to do a one-on-one conversation and moderate Q&A with Dr. Sue Stover. Dr. Stover maintains the California necropsy data and has done multiple studies over the years about horses coming off layoffs. And what we're going to see coming months is a lot of horses coming off layoffs. So hopefully we can use the necropsy data to teach us some valuable lessons for shoulder injuries and fetlocks and pelvic injuries and everything that she's learned with her work out there, high-speed furlongs and within a certain time frame. And then we'll wrap up the end of it with we'll wrap up the end of it with Dr. Parkin. We'll give the EID statistics from last year and give an overview of that. And then Dr. Mary Scolay will come in and do another Q&A with him moderated, which will answer any kind of questions about, hey, what have we learned about horses that have been on a vet's list? What are the predictive injuries, or what are the predictive factors we know about the fatalities we've seen since we've been doing the EID for the last decade? So it may be, they've looked at sealed racetracks from coming back from sealed racetracks, or how many furlongs in 30 days, or how many starts in 45 days, or 2-year-old races. Explain that again, of why 2-year-old racing is have lower incidence of fatalities, and all of those things that they've learned about predictive factors inside of the EID. So yeah, we've got 6 of them planned. We hope they're well received, and we'd like to do more if there's interest out there for them, because the fatality rate has been a success story, actually, overall in our industry. We went from not being able to tell you how many horses even suffered a fatality on the racetrack a decade ago, to now knowing and seeing that fatality rate decline.
Jamie, Liz Calloway Gooch has a really good question. When you're looking at those factors that might contribute to breakdowns, are you going to be looking at any particular bloodlines? Is that going to be part of the discussion, or is that like a tune in and find out situation?
They have not looked at any particular bloodlines. I don't know if they plan on doing that, or if he's run it in his statistical method and it hasn't been something that's been significant. Okay. You need the way the data works is you need a lot of massive starts. So even if you have a lot of one horse offspring, you still have to amass a critical mass for it to be scientifically significant in those models.
All right, thank you.
Jamie, you said that the schedule and the links will be at the Jockey Club website, jockeyclub.com?
Yep. They'll be on jockeyclub.com and grayson.com, and probably tomorrow, and definitely Monday and Tuesday of next week. And then you can find it all of our social media. We'll be pushing that out as well.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah, but the fetlock injury, and I'll let Sara talk about it, that the fetlock. Yeah, cats don't have bad fetlocks. I think they're okay.
Nor social distancing rules.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think Sara can tell you the fetlock injury is, that's the main point of where she probably would be working and finding problems with the horse.
Yeah, I mean, we have problems everywhere, but of the fatal injuries, the highest percentage is obviously in the fetlock. And there's a lot of stuff that goes on that, with this coming, with more use of MRI and better technology, that we're able to see even past what we could only limitedly see on radiographs, which was great. And digital radiographs are fantastic, but there's a lot more there that on the cellular level that we can't see yet.
CJ's Thoroughbreds just wanted to say that they're really glad that you are making this open to everyone, this discussion, because I think that for, whether you're a veterinarian to just a regular horse owner, this is crucial information to know what factors you have to look out for and what could contribute.
Oh yeah, and Penelope, we heard last week, which I think was pretty interesting. We did a show last week with New Vocations, one of the participants. I mean, they had record adoptions last month. You would think it's counterintuitive, right? Like, I mean, a lot of people are having a tough time financially right now with coronavirus and everything else. But there, for some reason, it seems like more people are becoming horse owners right now, or taking on
pet adoptions as well.
Yeah.
So
it's a good time to learn about how your animal works.
Yeah, for sure. All right, we're coming up on an hour. Before we wrap up, I just want to kind of go around the room. I know we covered a lot as far as laminitis goes, but just wanted to give everyone an opportunity. If there's anything we missed, we could start with Sara, then go to Andrew, then go to Jamie. Sara, let's start with you. Anything that we missed? Anything you'd like to really emphasize or drive home?
No, I mean, I think that just the biggest take-home points on laminitis is whenever it happens, it's pretty much an emergency. And so we all take it very seriously. And the quicker you can act on it, the better you will be as far as the long-term, you hope. It gives you the best opportunity the quicker you can arrest the situation and minimize things like we didn't really talk about, like rotation, and the better the outcome will be. So that's the take-home point for me.
Okay. Andrew?
I'll follow up on something Jamie said. Jamie, you were saying, I think it was like $2 million that Grayson had committed towards laminitis research since the late 90s. You know, which is an enormous amount of money and you know, a lot of resources. But to put it in perspective, laminitis is a problem with a complexity that's similar to cancer. And $2 million is a single grant for a cancer researcher over 2 years. So, you know, myself, my colleagues, you know, the shrinking group of people that research this disease. It's not an easy disease to research. It's a tough thing to try to research. You know, we are doing our best with quite small resources. So, you know, I think often, you know, horse owners, trainers, people involved kind of wonder why there hasn't been more progress with laminitis. That's the bottom line. It's tough, it's complicated, and the resources are small, and we cannot get money from NIH and places like that. We get money from the Grayson-Jockey Club Research Foundation. That is the primary source worldwide for most equine research that doesn't have you know, a human translational element, and laminitis falls right into that bucket. So, you know, for those frustrated horse owners out there, I say, you know, put your money where your mouth is. Give some money to Grayson. You know, it is by far the most rigorous, you know, scientific process that goes towards selection of who gets funded. And I've been on both sides of the coin on that one. So you can be really confident that your money is to the last cent being well directed.
Yeah,
well, that was a pretty impassioned setup for you, Jamie. So let people know how they can support the work that Grayson does first and foremost, and then leave us your parting thoughts.
2 easy ways. You could go to our website at grayson-jockeyclub.org. You can donate or become a member, or just pick up your mobile phone right now, text horse health to 243-725. Just text horse health to 243-725. It's a tax deductible donation. You'll get a receipt for your taxes, and money is going directly to research like Andrew's. So, and my parting thought is I'd like to thank both of these excellent doctors, because what they were talking about for the Grayson Research Foundation, we ask an awful lot of these individuals who volunteer for us. And I'll say volunteer with the air quotes, because they donate a tremendous amount of intellectual time from their schedule where they could be doing other things to help us select this research. It's easy to go out and ask for people money when we know it's going to be going to great research that is going to be conducted at institutions across the world, quite frankly, that is being reviewed with two great professionals like Sara and Andrew. At Grayson, and the reason we're successful in selecting the research is we put people like Andrew and Sara on the same grant to review. All of our grants will not only have a academic portion of it with reviewers, but they'll also have practicing veterinarians, because we want our research to be impactful. And that's where the practicing veterinarians go with the academic guys to determine what is going to be the most impactful research every year. And laminitis research, we don't get a grant every year, like Andrew said, because it's a shrinking field. But when we do see those grants, the laminitis grants are pretty impactful. And I'm sure this October, Andrew's working on a grant for submission with his kind words recently. And as a matter of fact, they work all year on these grants. I was sitting next to him at our research advisory committee meeting in January, and he was already beginning his work for October to submit his grant. So these guys live it, breathe it, and it's because they're really passionate about this beautiful animal we have, the horse.
Beautifully said.
Well, thank you for everyone to everyone for watching. Thank you to everyone who participated tonight. Penelope, you wanna bring us home?
I do. I just want to say another great way that I love to give to Grayson is they have a junior membership program. So if you have a little one in your life, like I signed my nephew up for junior membership. He got like a stuffed pony. He got to like name the pony. It's the cutest thing in the entire world. It gets kids interested in horses even more than they already naturally are. And again, you're giving to a great cause. We're so fortunate to have horses in our lives. I wake up every morning, and even though I couldn't be further away from being near a horse right now, like, they impact our lives if you're even remotely interested in them in the best possible way. And what better way to give back to the horses that give us so much joy than by helping to protect their health. So if you have even $1 to spare, it's a great cause. And hey, it's $1 you can write up on your taxes. So, what are you waiting for?
There you go.
Penelope, there's a new Grayson Gazette out that I thought maybe even you would enjoy the activities in. Much
Even
less
me, I'm like yeah, dude, I'm in.
All right. Well, thank you again to everyone. Thank you to Sarah. Thank you to Andrew. Thank you to Jamie. We will see you back here next week. Same place, same time. Be safe, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Penelope.